And yes, we are live. I'm back with Brenden. How you doing, Brenden?
I'm doing all right. How you doing, man?
Glad to continue the discussion from where we left off. Since we last spoke, I think I talked to Kevin and you talked to Kevin. Does that make sense? Is that what happened?
Yeah. I know you made introductions. I appeared on his podcast. I finally officially have an actual video on my YouTube channel with another one mostly done being scripted.
It's a lot of work editing and all that, isn't it?
See, the one I posted on my YouTube channel, I didn't even bother to edit. The topics it was going over were things I don't care about.
Yeah.
So I put a lot of work into getting my sources together and making a slideshow, and then I was just like, that's it, I'm done. Yeah. That's the work you get. No edits. We're doing one through.
That was a one take?
Yep.
Ah, okay. I didn't watch the whole thing. I started it and I had other things to do, but is it worth my looking at it? Like, is it, it's got some depth to it in terms of arguments or no?
I mean, my primary approach, like I told Hugh when he brought the topics up that I just didn't want to talk about them. I'm not an expert in those fields. They get extremely technical, and if you can't get on the like deep technical level, there tend to be some apologetic ways to kind of make your opponent look bad on all four topics without actually having depth to your argument. And I was like, I just don't want to deal with it. It's not my favorite. But Hugh kind of insisted and refused to move forward unless I did them. So I really spend the first like 20 minutes or so talking about methodology, talking about what atheism is, and getting into kind of the like why, even if we didn't know about these four topics, it wouldn't matter for atheism specifically. And then when I get into the topics, my focus is really heavily on just here are studies, right? So like in the abiogenesis question, right? Can life come from non-life? Literally what I do is just go, hey, like we have multiple different plausible theories as to how we get life from non-life. Here they are. And here's like 3 or 4 scholarly articles that get into all of them. Like if you're actually interested in how scientists say that we can get life from non-life, here's the science. You can go and read the science, but I'm not particularly, it's not one of my areas of expertise. It's not something I'm really comfortable talking about in depth. So here's the science. That's all I'm going to be doing anyways. It's going and reading those articles and then regurgitating the information. And we'll save some time, and I'll just give you the article.
Yeah. I can tell you I have zero respect for academia and science today and the experts today. Basically approaching 0% respect, because it's a joke. It's corrupt. Same thing with pretty much every field: journalism, academia, science, the health sciences. It's all corrupt, not to mention politics and whatever. So not to sound like a cynical old bastard, but I did study hard science. I studied physics at university, and I've worked in the field, and I know the difference between something that's grounded in sound principles and something that's basically a house of cards. It may be beautiful, it may be elegant, it may be coherent until you examine the metaphysical foundation, and then it's just like a waste of time. It's a waste of money, and I'm sorry, it's a joke. So that's why I studied physics, because it was the most fundamental natural science.
Yeah.
And I wanted to understand ultimate reality. And as it turns out, our education system here in Canada, and I'm sure in the States, is geared more towards industry, the workforce, and just that sort of practical, pragmatic sort of approach. I was very frustrated and disappointed with my education, because I thought what I thought I was going to get into by studying physics was more pure and philosophical approach to ultimate reality, but that's not what it was. They just give you the tools, how to crunch the numbers on, Now, the problem is I did join a very engineering heavy program. It's called applied physics instead of pure physics. So that's just the program that I got accepted into. And it's a great school for physics. It's the University of Waterloo here in Canada. It's very well reputed, especially for physics. But it's just way more pragmatic and practical than suits my predisposition, because my predisposition is seeking the truth for the truth's sake, and I don't care about money, career, and ladder climbing and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But it was good because it gave me experience. Like I had work experience. I worked in quantum physics. I actually co-authored a paper in quantum physics. I worked in astrophysics. I worked at the Canadian Space Agency. I worked on a satellite project, a very small component of the Odin satellite project, which is an international space station thing, or international satellite. And, so I got a lot of work experience out of it. And that's where I met a lot of different personalities that are, academics and professional scientists and published authors and these sorts of things. And, it gave me a sense of what the community is like. And I heard some of the gossip. And so it was interesting to get that insider thing. But I eventually left the field, went into computer stuff.
So I'm curious. You kind of painted a wide brush over the whole of academia and scholarship there.
Yeah,
I could definitely agree with you on principle on some of the fields, but I'm curious your lack of. What specific wording did you use? Your lack of respect for? Or your
lack of respect. Lack of respect.
Yeah, for scholarship just kind of as a whole.
Well, it's because I'm philosophically minded, I'm always trying to ground everything in philosophy and in particular metaphysics. And the natural sciences, I knew enough about the history of the natural sciences to know that they're built on the axiomatic assumptions of metaphysics and philosophy generally. And so when I see someone straying from that and building a model, which, like I said, may be very elaborate, very beautiful, and coherent as far as it goes, when they build that model on a set of axiomatic assumptions which are faulty, that's where I lose respect for the whole edifice. And
Sure.
that's what I see happening a lot in these times, these sad, pathetic times that we're living in today, this postmodern era where there is no truth. You have your truth, I have my truth, and people are running with this. People are running with this just ungrounded models, and I'm going to build my house of cards, you build your house of cards, and I'm getting published and you're getting published, and they're both peer reviewed and they're both nonsense. It's like,
Right.
Now where the rubber meets the road, and where I do have a lot of respect is for technology and engineering, because technology and engineering and architecture and construction, and that's the field I work in now, is construction. That you can't BS your way through it with a bunch of fake models. Sure. It's like the bridge will stand under the weight or it won't.
Sure.
So, and same thing with your iPhone. Like if you build a better iPhone, people will buy it. And if you build a piece of crap that has good marketing and a good sales pitch and all the blah, 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 it doesn't matter how much blah, blah, blah there is. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So that's where the rubber meets the road. And I guess that's one of the benefits of having studied applied physics rather than just pure physics, is that I was able to get my hands dirty with that sort of boring and uninteresting part of the natural sciences, where it interfaces with very, very practical and pragmatic stuff, where you just don't, you can't sell a product that doesn't work, and you can't sell a service that doesn't work. So I'm a sort of at two extremes. On the one extreme, I'm a purist, where I want the philosophical, metaphysical undergirding of science to be respected in order for me to respect your hard science. And on the other hand, I also respect the more blue-collar approach to science, where it's just like, we're going to build a grommet, we're going to build a better grommet, and we're going to sell you our grommets. But in between, there's a whole bunch of BS and ladder climbing and this publisher's game, where people are getting money for publications. The more publications, the more money. And it's a dirty, dirty world, very dirty, and there's collusion, there's corruption, there's fraud, and there's favoritism, and it's just sickening.
Yeah, I'm curious. This is actually, I'm happy this came up, because this is one of the things I was super curious about that came up kind of in the very end of you and I's last conversation, and then a bit from listening to, which I haven't listened to all of your interviews with R and Raw. Listen to the whole Kent Hovind one though, and my goodness, was that a trip? Uh, but I'm curious. You mentioned the basic metaphysics of science. What would you say would be then the proper metaphysics of science versus what would you say is the problem with our current metaphysics?
Well, one of the most obvious ones is the principle of causality, which is now coming under fire. The principle of people are attacking the principle of causality. So they want to claim to be physicists, and they're undermining the principle of causality. They're saying it doesn't always hold, doesn't necessarily hold. And if you want to talk about going on the internet and finding papers, like BS papers, what I consider nonsense papers, which I have zero respect for, you'll find a stack of people who are making money talking about how the principle of causality is no longer valid. It's no longer universally valid. Same thing with the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason. People are attacking that. And these are philosophers of science, and they're also scientists working in the field. And the people are attacking from all angles, right? There are people in pure philosophy who are attacking these philosophical principles that undergird the hard sciences, the natural sciences. And it's a multi-pronged attack on the most cherished and fundamental axiomatic assumptions of the natural sciences, such as the PSR and the principle of causality. The principle of proportionate causality is sort of a corollary of the principle of causality, but all these principles. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say just the principle of causality. So I've heard it questioned as far as like origin of the universe sort of thing, right? Like the big issue of the fact that causality is definitely something that we see consistently in our universe. What is it like before our universe?
Yeah, but we don't need to go that far. We don't need to go that far. We could just look at quantum physics. Like because of the new physics, from the last century, there are people that have called into doubt the principle of causality. Just because of the quantum stuff, where we don't have there's a Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which I'm sure you've heard about, and all these sorts of things. And so people are of different philosophical camps. Like you've got the Schrodinger, the Copenhagen interpretation, the Schrodinger's cat and all this sort of thing.
Sure.
I've always rejected that. Even when I was an atheist, I rejected that because as an atheist, I was a hard determinist, and I believe in it's something I've always clinged to as a principle of causality. We can't chuck it out. And this whole Copenhagen school, it's just one philosophical interpretation of the data, but it dominates, and it's been damaging. I think it's been damaging to the quality of the scientific work that's being done, and certainly in academia, it's been a tragic mistake. Einstein famously said, "God does not play dice." I don't agree with Einstein on everything either, but I think on that he was right. And there were a few others that were more realist in terms of causation.
So I'm interested. Definitely see that with quantum physics. Frankly, I don't know. Quantum physics is, I don't want to say it's like a quack science.
It's not a quack science. It's a very good respected. It's one of the most reliable sciences we have. But the packaging of it, the selling of books around it, it's like a new age cult. It's a new age cult with the woo-woo.
Yeah.
Because people think that because there's some sort of mystery and ambiguity in this field, so people are just inserting this atheistic God into quantum physics. It's just like, people can't help but mystify and obfuscate, and they put everything, all of their prejudices in every dark corner of the universe, whether it's cosmological stuff with relativity or the microfield, this very small with quantum stuff. They're always looking for a hiding place to put all their prejudices, to put all their beliefs and all their superstitions. Like that's what people do. We all do it. I'm prone to superstition just as much as the atheist. But for the atheist to think that they're free, and this is not directed at you, but just the atheist generally, to think that they're free from prejudice, they're free from bias, and they're free from superstition is a joke. It's really is sad, and they lack self-awareness. At least I'm self-aware. I know that I have prejudice. I know I'm biased, and I know I'm prone to superstition. So,
Yeah, well, and I don't know. I find that the atheists who would consider themselves skeptics tend to be better at that, right? Because they tend to be the more academic, intellectual, right? Like those are the atheists that I enjoy actually conversing with, right? You've got the difference between the people who call themselves atheists, but it's more, they've not really thought about it. And you've got the people like, I don't know, anyone with any kind of academic honesty understands that they have bias and that they have to filter through that. Hopefully. But I'm curious with that. So if we were to say, take quantum physics out of the question, though, what about the rest of the sciences, right? What about the rest of physics or biology or astronomy or geology, right? Some of the ones that are a little less new and a little less flexible in the literature.
Well, I think I don't know if we're allowed to talk about COVID yet because YouTube is very harsh with the censorship. But
That one sickness thing happened.
Yeah. I would just say that I'm very disappointed with those who work in biochemistry and microbiology or whatever those fields are that are related to all this stuff. I mean, I know people who work in this field that are in school in this field, and I'm very, very disappointed with the level of education when it comes to common sense and when it comes to basic principles. It's not a principle-based thing. It's here's the dogma, and regurgitate the dogma. But I disagree with the dogmas of many of the dogmas of biology and many of the dogmas of chemistry when it comes to wielding these as a weapon to claim consensus, that there's some sort of uniform monolithic consensus. There's not. There never has been, there never will be. But a lot of people want to wield this power that we're the experts, we have the consensus, we're going to force your hand. And it's shameful. It's shameful behavior. It's kind of like politics, how it just spoils everything, and power politics. And we could talk about natural resources and how shady people are when it comes to grabbing other people's natural resources. It's the same thing with academic stuff or intellectual property. It's disgusting. It's just human behavior is disgusting. It's really disgusting. Now, is there admirable progress in all of the natural sciences? Of course, over the past few hundred years. Yeah, of course. Amazing. But like I said, my caveat to my whole disgust is where the rubber meets the road. If something works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's the test. But there's a lot of money up for grab in the Department of Speculation and publications and ideas, selling ideas and selling books and giving talks. And it's like, if that's why I'm comfortable on one end of the spectrum and on the other end of the spectrum, but in between there's so much nonsense that's being sold. And to use the example of biology, like I said, I mean, I'm disgusted. I'm thoroughly disgusted. Even with the medical professionals and the so-called medical experts, I'm disgusted with the lack of. There's supposed to be a disinterested love of truth. Yeah. And that's the main thing that's lacking. I could say the same about journalism. I'm thoroughly disgusted with journalism. The state of journalism is disgusting. If you are a man or woman of integrity that goes into journalism, you will probably not survive in that field because there's no place for integrity, right? It's a dog eat dog world. We got to make money, and to make money, this is how the mafia world works. You want to be you want to play ball. Well, this is how we play ball. If you want to play by the book, see you later. Like there's no room for you here. That's why I don't think we can vote our way out of tyranny in the West. And
yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Like, I know Canada has its issues, right, with the prime minister essentially being a near dictator with his ability to wield power,
and control the media.
Yeah. Meanwhile, yesterday, our former president and currently still running and potentially future president was served with 37 indictments for the fact that he actively stole paperwork, classified information.
I looked through the publication.
It was so funny. There were some moments in that just made me laugh. But there's one part where he he says, like, they were reporting on how he talked, like in the indictment list, right? It talked about how he complained in his presidency, like how he told reporters, yeah, I have this classified information. You're not allowed to see it, but here's what it says. And then right after that, there was a little like aside where it quoted him in his presidency saying, man, I don't understand how these journalists keep getting classified information. It's the strangest thing. Somebody should do something about it. Just like, it was a funny document to read.
Yeah.
But it's funny in that, like, oh my goodness, like, this is the country we're in, right? And I completely agree. We can't really vote our way. I mean, when our two candidates here in the States are, you know, Biden and Trump, you're not voting your way out of a situation. You're just maybe postponing it. Y'all's situation is similar with the prime minister. I think, you know, the Western world is kind of due for some change with the corruption that's seeped in. And I can definitely agree with the science, right? Like, there's definitely fields in which that seeps in. My one concern is, I see this a lot when I talk to some of my more fundamentalist friends, is they will, you know, we'll talk about things like evolution, or big pharma, or you know, and they'll make a claim about how, you know, corruption is in the science, and so therefore we can't trust it, and they're using that to back their guy, who himself has made a career off of saying the opposite, and thus being, you know, like, Ken Ham had no place on national TV debating Bill Nye. He's just like, Ken Ham just doesn't have the credentials for that. But because he's one of the few loud voices in creationism, right? Like, he's able to kind of skip up the chain of command and put himself at kind of a higher place of respect than you would be able to.
I'm not too familiar with him. I find he doesn't have the charisma of Kent Hovind, right? So
very true.
That's probably why he didn't get on my radar. But I would need to, you know, look at his arguments and Bill Nye. I don't have any respect for Bill Nye, by the way, but
Sure.
you know, I need to look at the arguments on both sides, and then just sort of like come to a decision. And, you know, there are, you know, my thing is not so much let's sort out the good guys from the bad guys. Like, okay, I thoroughly investigated this guy's way of thinking, and I agree with it 75%. I thoroughly investigated this guy's way of thinking, and I've got put a percentage on him and him and him and him. No one has time for that. And that just to completely miss the point of life. My life is not about that. My life is not to go around policing the experts. Okay. My life is about getting right with God, so I can, you know, to know God, to love God, and to serve God in this life, so I can be happy with him forever in the next life. But as a casual armchair philosopher, I can look at, you know, some uneducated Christian guy talking with an over-educated and over-acclaimed expert in any field, and I can side with the Christian, not for the reasons that you think, but because I'm going to see humility, I'm going to see submission to God's will, I'm going to see vulnerability and honesty, foolishness, if you will, like a certain foolishness, which is, you know, the antidote to worldliness, really. Like, I mean, you can conform to the world, or you can conform to Christ, and we call it the foolishness of following Christ, because it's not worldly, and the world laughs at it. And as an atheist, if you're an atheist, then you're going to be prone to that prejudice where you'll look down your nose at the believer, whatever the religion is, and you'll miss the point. Like, you might be straining out each and every gnat very carefully, but you swallow a camel. You know, you'll swallow the camel. So to me, there's this philosophy called essentialism. I don't subscribe to it, I don't believe in it, but it's sort of a good starting point for someone who isn't sure what to believe. Essentialism just says that, look, we have many ways of placing our emphasis in this life, and what we focus on, what filters we put on when we're examining absolutely everything, whether it's personal relationships, politics, and everything in between. And the way to sort that out is to sort of decide in your heart of hearts what's the most essential thing, what's most important. And for me, and for for all monotheists, it's knowing God, loving God, serving God, so we can be happy with him in the next life. So that will inform everything, all of the stuff that, like, if you and I were to sit down and watch YouTube and watch a bunch of debates and a bunch of content, we're going to come from very, 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 very different perspective when we're analyzing it afterwards, right?
There. So I'm curious, how do you avoid circular reasoning with that, right? Like, does it kind of sounds like that could fall into the trap of starting with the presupposition of God's existence, right? Starting with the presupposition of monotheism and then filtering information that could contradict monotheism through that presupposition.
It's not a presupposition, it's the opposite of a presupposition. I assume that there is no God, and then I use radical doubt to doubt everything that I can doubt. Every faith-based belief I subject to scrutiny, skepticism, and doubt, and I tear it down, reject, until I'm left with the one assertion which I can't deny, which is I am. So I try to deny even my own existence, and that very denial becomes an assertion of my existence. So this is how I came to God, is through radical doubt. And it's the Cartesian method of building. He wanted to build a new natural science, and he succeeded, Descartes, with help from many others, like Francis Bacon, whatever. But he built the new science, and he chucked out some stuff that is essential to my worldview, like final causality and what's the other one? Formal causality. He chucked those into the bin. And thanks in part to René Descartes, we have the scientism in the pejorative sense of the word that we have today. Because there's, without final causality and without formal causality, this stuff makes sense. Like, I've got this shirt, Satan respects pronouns. That makes sense based on what Descartes started. If we get rid of final causality, we get rid of formal causality, yeah, sure, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth, and there's no human nature. And it also goes back to William of Ockham with his nominalism. That was a major blow to science. So when I talk about my disdain for the sciences today, it's a general blanket statement, but it's rooted in William of Ockham and René Descartes, the damage that they did. So I hope you're getting some sort of sense of how my Christian faith is built on monotheism, but my monotheism is a certainty that I can deconstruct and reconstruct using nothing but pure reason without recourse to any faith-based beliefs whatsoever. And I have many videos where I talk about this. I'll send you links if you're interested in understanding how I think about it. A couple of them are Doubt, Faith, and Reason. That's one episode that's good for you to understand how I deconstruct and reconstruct. But monotheism is not a faith-based belief for me. But Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are, because they introduce faith-based beliefs. So that's what protects me from having circular reasoning. The atheist is forced into circular reasoning, especially when it comes to cosmology, because you're forced to either admit an infinite universe in space or an infinite universe in time, or anything. You are forced to admit absolutely anything but the one rational explanation, which is the uncaused first cause, and that's my God that I worship.
I'm going to push back against that just a little bit. Just for one, on the basis that as an atheist, the only thing I guess that I'm really forced to believe is just, actually no, that's not even true. I don't know. I see atheism just as a lack of belief in a God, right? I wouldn't even go as far as to say that I believe that there is no God. I'm not convinced that there is one, right? The idea that there is a God is kind of the claim that needs backing, and I just am unconvinced by it.
Right, but if I asked you, do you believe that there is one and only one uncaused first cause, the source of everything that is, you have to say no. Otherwise, you're a monotheist. That's the definition of monotheism, is that you believe in the supernatural uncaused first cause. That's the definition of natural theism and monotheism. That's the definition of it.
I would disagree that that is necessarily monotheistic, right? Like, you can believe in a world, for instance, in which there are two separate beings, and one of them happens to be the first cause, right? Like, you can believe, like, it doesn't necessarily, I think, necessitate monotheism.
Well, if you understand what you're saying when you say that there's an uncaused first cause, then you understand that that's monotheism. You may not understand that. You may not understand that. So you're agnostic. Maybe you're agnostic about God. Maybe you're agnostic about the uncaused first cause. But there aren't two uncaused first causes, and you would need to dive into the metaphysics of the uncaused first cause to understand and believe what I'm saying. And we could
Oh, no,
we could
I
talk
don't think
about that.
necessarily. I don't think necessarily there would have to be like two uncaused first causes. There can be one uncaused first cause, but there could be two beings that exist, and one of them is the one that is the cause, right? Like, that's more the, like.
Yeah, well, there are many beings. You exist, I exist, God exists. There's three. I just named three off the top of my head.
Sure.
But only God is the uncaused first cause. I'm not. Like, when I was a hard solipsist, I thought I was the uncaused first cause. Okay, I was wrong. And the way to prove it, I have actually figured out a way to prove that I'm not the uncaused first cause. I found a way to prove that, and I have an episode about that. I'll send you the link if you want. But it's a very silly episode. But
Well, and more specifically, I think the point that I'm trying to get at here is like, I think you and I can both agree that we can get back to a point where we go, okay, at some point, things started moving into motion into what we see today. And then both of us would look at that point right before that and go, okay, what are we seeing? I would say, I don't know. Right? Like, I would just blatantly, I don't know. I don't know what.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it is a like coherent. Like, we know that time is a feature of the of our universe. I don't know what it is to even try and like talk about before time. Like, that seems.
Yeah. We would need to speak. We would need to speak like, about a logical antecedent.
Yeah, right. So like it, like I will just very blatantly just be like, I don't know, right? Like,
yeah.
I know that there are some theories in science. They are all speculative and outside of my realm of expertise. I don't know what came before. I'm just unconvinced of it being a creator. But then, like, where my questioning on this would come, where I'd be interested, is if you believe that there is, say, an existence outside of this existence,
yeah.
right? The nature of that existence then can only maybe be like partially known.
Yeah.
So in theory, that
known
existence.
By analogy, we say known by analogy. We know the uncreated by analogy by looking at creation. We look at creation. Creation implies creator, and I'm speaking just very fast and loose here, but the contingent implies the necessary being. But yeah, the necessary being, the uncaused first cause, is unknowable, and it will remain unknowable for all eternity, even when we go, God willing, to be with him and to enjoy life in heaven. Even then, it will remain unknowable for all eternity for us creatures. Okay, that's a dogma of the church. So, yeah, the unknowability, that's not a hindrance. What we do know is sufficient, right? And the other thing I'd like to say, if you don't mind, because you brought it up, is we don't even need to assume that the universe, the created universe, had a beginning. St. Thomas Aquinas emphasizes these unmoved mover sort of proofs, and goes backwards in time and these sorts of things. But Blessed John Duns Scotus, who's a lesser known philosopher, but I think a more brilliant philosopher, he didn't like St. Thomas Aquinas's approach, and he thought it was unnecessary. And we can just assume that there is endless time behind us. That's not a problem, even though he doesn't believe that there is, but we could assume that. And we could focus just on cause and effect at any point in time. And so the issue of going backwards in time becomes moot. We don't need to look at what happened long, long ago. We could look at right now, what happened right now. So the thing about Blessed John Duns Scotus is he came up with, instead of an a priori proof, he came up with an a posteriori proof, which is more solid, and it's not subject to the same attacks that, for example, St. Anselm's argument, that than which nothing greater can be conceived, all these sorts of arguments. He does lean on that to a certain extent, but he puts it in the context of a posteriori. So we're starting with the effects which are manifest, which are observable, and then working back, not in time, but working up the essentially ordered series of causality in the moment, the simultaneous causality in the moment, to get to that one and only efficient first cause, which is atemporal, which is outside of space and time. And he has a brilliant proof, which is very subtle and very difficult to wrap your head around, because it is so subtle. It's simple but subtle, and I hope you'll look into it so we can discuss it one day. But
yes,
it's the type of thing where right now any effect that you see around you, and all you have around you are effects. Everything is an effect. Every event is an effect of a cause. So we can look at each and every one of them using our mind's eye to freeze time and to look at the chain of causality that's in play. And we know that there is always a first efficient cause in each and every one of these timeless, essentially ordered series of causality, because otherwise to say that there's not a first efficient cause in an essentially ordered series is necessarily to say something crazy, which is to say it's a contradiction to say that there's always missing in each step of that process, in each link of that chain, there's always missing something which is manifest in the effect. So that cannot be. So we know that there is a first efficient cause always, and we're able, by looking at this, we're able to come to the conclusion. It's a formal demonstration according to the strict and rigorous demands of Aristotle when he defined what a strict demonstration was in philosophy. It entailed an effect which is certain and a cause which is certain. Because the problem with a lot of the natural sciences, and even with a lot of philosophy and a priori proofs, is that we have one or the other, but not both. And so what Aristotle said, if we want to have an airtight argument where no one can refute it, we would need both the cause and the effect to be certain. And so, and to be necessary. That's the word he used. They need to be necessary. Not only certain, but necessary. So this is the approach that Blessed John Duns Scotus uses, and I'll send you links after this, and you can look into it. But it gets us away from the whole thing about traveling backwards in time, which is often a red herring, and we can get lost and confused. And you could just shrug it off and say, "Well, I just don't know what came before time," And so it's not really going to get us very far.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be interested to see his arguments for that, because as it stands, I'm failing to see how you can escape the beginning of time as the beginning of the causal chain. So I'll
well, you've heard in the East, in the Hinduism or whatever, they talk about God the creator, God the destroyer, God the sustainer. You've heard about that? Well, my God is the creator, the sustainer, and he's not really the destroyer of souls, because he has willed, for whatever reason, that our souls are eternal. It doesn't have to be that way, but he so wills it that our souls are eternal. So he's not destroying souls, human souls, or the spirit souls, the angels. He chose not to destroy them for whatever reason, according to the dogmas of the Catholic Church. But my point here is that he's the sustainer of everything. So to talk about the creation is one thing, but let's talk about the sustaining. And that's what this proof hinges on. It hinges on, and it shows that there is a sustainer God that is sustaining. And then he goes on to, he doesn't call it God, he calls it the first efficient cause. But then he goes on to unpack it with further proofs to show how it is the God of monotheism. So it's a very interesting proof.
Yeah, please send that my way, because I'm very interested.
Yeah.
So kind of piggybacking off of that topic, I'm kind of interested just overall in, so you were atheist, you left atheism, you engage now in a podcast that kind of focuses on, the the name of the podcast I've seen is the like Catholic versus atheist.
Yeah. Catholic versus this, Catholic versus that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just as an interesting point of conversation, like what would you consider to be the weakest points of atheism? Like you've mentioned
the
metaphysics. How so? Other than the ones we've already talked about.
Well, because the uncaused first cause, that's the main one, but sure. Just the abandonment of most of the principles, and you may accept certain metaphysical principles and reject other ones, and then another atheist may accept a different set or subset of metaphysical principles because that they haven't discovered yet how it's inconvenient to hold to that particular metaphysical principle. You know what I mean? So it's like a buffet where the atheist is the ultimate authority, and the atheist is deciding for himself, like as if he's God, what is true, what's not true, what's good, what's evil. That's what the forbidden fruit's all about, right? Like you decide for yourself what's good, what's evil. You judge for yourself what's true, what's false. You have your truth, I have my truth. It's this whole unhinging from, or unmooring from God and from the philosophical principles, because you have to understand that from my perspective, there's a hierarchy in the sciences where God is science, big S science. God is knowledge, God is wisdom, right? God is science, big S. And then underneath God, we have theology, and underneath theology, we have philosophy. Underneath philosophy, we have the natural sciences. Underneath the natural sciences, we have all kinds of social sciences and all kinds of stuff. It gets looser and looser and looser. So, yeah, when you're an atheist, you've pitched out God, so your theology is basically gone. And you could have an ersatz theology, you could have Gaia, Mother Earth, and your ecology goddess, and you could have all these kinds of fake goddesses or gods that you insert, like willingly or unwillingly, like maybe just by impulse, by instinct.
I was going to say willingly kind of defeats the point of atheism. If you just put one out and replace it with another, you kind of still in that like theist realm.
But you've seen people do this, right? I'm sure you've seen people do this.
Oh, absolutely.
Worshipping their cat. People worship their cat like a god.
Yeah, so I don't know, that's a kind of an interesting point that I see really frequently, kind of a tendency in the theism realm, especially in Christian apologetics, to just kind of call anything that they don't agree with, or call something that somebody's like focused on, to call it a religion, right? So you see this, I see this all the time especially with Protestant. I don't see it as much with Catholics. Catholics tend to be a lot more reserved, and in part because Catholicism is itself more formal, and there are more formal guides to what is and isn't religious, whereas Protestantism, all that gets thrown out the window. But I'm curious if maybe there ought to be a distinction between what is religion as far as an actual like formal religion, where you actually have something like, doesn't intent play some role in religion on kind of a formal basis, right? Like not so much colloquially, where we can maybe play with like colloquial definitions of the word, but like if we're talking in an academic sense, doesn't intention matter?
Yeah. But I would rather like just cut the Gordian knot instead of trying to take some sort of top-down approach to defining it. I'd rather take the existential approach, where I'm a human being talking to another human being, and I'm telling you right now that I was God. I was my own God, and it's easy for you to accept that because I'm telling you I was a hard solipsist, and that what that is. It's like you are the only being. You are the source of everything that is. That's what hard solipsism is. I thought I was just a disembodied mind, and so you believe me. You might think I'm crazy. That's fine, and it is crazy. But I'm here in front of you. I'm another human being telling you that I was my own God. I was my own God, and I was an atheist. I was an atheist. Okay, so there's an example. There's a data point for your little graph on the spectrum of like from one extreme to the other. Are there some atheists who believe in God? Yeah, there are. You're talking to one right now. Okay, so you could say, well, it's crazy, it's incoherent, doesn't make sense in this, like that. Of course, that's why I came to monotheism. But you know, and it's a wonderful path. It's a very quick shortcut into monotheism, heart solipsism. But it's a very harrowing path. It's basically like just sort of like a little bit more pleasant version of nihilism. It's nudging right up against nihilism.
Well, I mean, I would probably push back and say that heart solipsism is itself monotheism, right? Like it is monotheism, right? Like you're not.
It's a false monotheism. It's a false monotheism.
Right. So you know, even the assertion of atheism there, I would say, is incorrect, because you do believe in God. You just believe that you're it. That you have, like,
yeah, but how do you explain my conversion to hard solipsism? Because it was a slippery slope from German idealism and all my philosophical reading as an atheist, and I was calling myself an atheistic Satanist at the time, and all this slippery slope as I start examining the questions of metaphysics and I start calling into doubt everything that I had taken for granted my whole life long about ultimate reality, and I end up being a hard solipsist. You would say that I had a conversion to monotheism. I would say no, I was just lost, and I was sort of anti-monotheism. I was like the, you know, matter antimatter, sort of like this demonic inversion of monotheism, because there's nothing more diametrically opposed to monotheism than hard solipsism. Like, it's the complete opposite. And the place in terms of a subjective existential experience of being a hard solipsist and then being a true monotheist, it's night and day. It's like one is hell, the other is heaven. It's like it's very clear. So you can't sit there and say, oh, one God, therefore monotheism. No, it's like anti-monotheism, and it's on a spectrum. Like I slipped down the slippery slope. It started with German idealism, and it just led me darker and darker because of the radical doubt that I engaged, because I am skeptical. It led me slowly, piece by piece, into a darker and darker atheism, and the darkest point of my atheism was the hard solipsism. And so I think you have to admit that there's a quantum leap between my hard solipsism and monotheism, even if you don't agree with or even understand maybe what I believe when I believe in the uncaused first cause. But you have to admit that I'm telling you existentially, that's what I went through. I went deeper into darkness and I found the light, and the light, I'm not the source of the light. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I just based off of your description of your journey, it seems less to me like a quantum leap and more like, I don't know, one of my favorite analogies that I use for various things all the time is if you're looking at a color wheel, right, and you've got like blue and you've got red, and you can very clearly see one is blue and one is red.
Right.
But if I get enough into that color wheel, if that color wheel is detailed enough, and I try and tell you to like point to the moment where you have switched from blue to red, you can't do it, right? There's no moment. It almost seems more similar to
That's
that.
not a good analogy for what I experienced. Not at all. No.
Not from,
No.
I mean, specifically why I'm considering this, and after I flesh it out, if it just doesn't work,
Yeah,
absolutely. But is that shift, because it sounds like you shifted towards an idea of a first, or of a like uncaused causer, and it was just that you're the uncaused causer, right? Like, it sounds like with that journey into solipsism, like you shifted out of, say, doubting whether that even exists, and into, okay, it exists and I'm it, and then shifting from no, I'm not it, to something else is it, seems more natural than a quantum leap. Does that make sense?
well, I mean, it's like it's there are a few things more intimate and personal than personal identity. Like, I am, when I say I am, it's true that I do exist, and it's true I believe that you exist, because I'm no longer a hard solipsist, thank God. But when I say that I am, or when you say that you are, or when I say that you are, I mean something, and it's related to the existence of God, but it's related in a way that is, you know, a quantum leap away from that hard solipsist identification with life itself. Like, I believed that I was life, the only life, the source of life, and all these sorts of things. Because my radical doubt led me to examine everything and to doubt everything that I could doubt. I could not deny my own existence, and I could not deny life. And I identified for a short time, because it's a painful place to be. I identified with that life, that I was that life, that I am the source of life, and But the personal experience of being confused about your own identity, and then in a flash, I remember the exact moment where I went from thinking I was God to realizing that I'm not God and that God is God. It was a shortcut that I took. It was a very beautiful shortcut that I took. My journey was a beautiful shortcut, but it went by going into the darkest place I could be and the most profoundly wrong identification of self that I could possibly have. And then, thanks to Rene Descartes, I was actually reading Rene Descartes when I had the epiphany, because he helped me out of my hard solipsism. I remember the exact moment it happened. And then my self-identity was inverted 180 degrees. No, I am not God. God is God, and I'm a creature of God. And what a relief it was. And you can critique psychologically, oh, you wanted the easy way, you couldn't handle the tension of being God, whatever. Well, you try it. Try it. You can't. The funny thing about hard solipsism is you can't actually willfully trick yourself into, okay, I'm going to go into that headspace. You can't. I, just by providence or whatever, or mental illness, whatever, that allowed me unwittingly, foolishly, to go darker and darker down this path. It's something that happened to me. But if I tell you, okay, as your homework assignment before we have our third episode, I want you to become a hard solipsist, you can't do it.
No, yeah.
It's like you can listen to me speak, and you can imagine what it's like, and all that. But I mean, existentially, I have an experience that you don't have, and this is not to like say, ha ha ha, you can't reproduce my experience, and therefore I win the argument. That's not what it's about. But I'm telling you, I had the experience, and there's nothing more intimate than your own identity of self, and it was a 180-degree inversion, and that's why I make it more akin to a quantum leap than to just a little minuscule step, even though it was a great shortcut into monotheism. But I think we've exhausted this part. We can move on to other things that you want us to talk about.
Yeah. No, totally fair. No, sorry. And I didn't mean to, like, it wasn't my intention to come on and just ask a bunch of questions about you. I find your way of thinking really, really interesting. I'm trying to understand from some of the content I've listened to of yours and from our conversations, a couple of the places in which you and I differ on our epistemology, basically. And why that difference is there. Because that's what I find really, really interesting is the, like, where's the difference? Why is the difference there? And that's where I think if I were to come out of atheism, right, it would be because I was convinced it wasn't true, right? Like, I mean, similar to you can't just will yourself to be a solipsist. You can't just will yourself to believe that unicorns actually exist. I'm convinced I can't just will myself at this point to believe God exists, right? Like, I would have to be convinced. Something would have to come up. Yeah. And part of that is, I think, if it were to happen, it would be from engaging with people's epistemologies and understanding, like, how are you seeing the same things that I'm seeing and coming to a completely different conclusion? And is the problem here me? Is my epistemology the problem? And if so, let's adjust it and then look at everything again. Or is the problem your epistemology? Is it that there's not a problem at all? It's just, all of those.
How do you see my epistemology right now? How would you characterize it in a summary? One or two sentences.
I don't know that I could confidently say that off the top of my head. You've given me a lot of very, very, like, deep pieces of information that I'm gonna need some time to, like, process and think through. And
well, my epistemology is grounded in my ontology, and my ontology is based on that existential journey that I experienced. And you can explain it away a million different ways. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that I was confronted with life itself, eternal life, right? I was confronted with eternal life, and I identified with that eternal life. And then to my great relief, I realized I'm not that. It's God. That's what everyone's been talking about. Like, 'cause, you know, I was born and raised Protestant Christian, and at age 14, I lost my faith, and I was atheist for 25 years. And during that 25 years, I went through all kinds of different headspaces. But, you know, I didn't get it. I didn't, you know, I had lost my faith at age 14. So, like, I didn't understand who's this God and why is there evil, and like much like you know, the problem of evil, and you know, the God of the Bible seems like a monster and all these sorts of things, and much like you, and that's, I think, a reasonable stance for someone who doesn't have a relationship with God. I think that's the natural stance. That's why atheists are the way they are, right? It's like, it's not coincidence. It's the way they are because that's what they're working with, right? So my epistemology is grounded in my ontology, and my ontology is based on this existential thing, and my confrontation with life, and then my identification with it, and then my realization that God is God, I'm not God. And so that's so now I have just a very few handful of principles that guide me when I'm evaluating the news, or looking at politics, or looking at science, or looking at anything, or having a conversation with you. You know, I evaluate everything just on a handful of principles, the first of which is that God exists, and we can know with certainty that God exists. It's not a faith-based belief, although it is a dogma of the church that, you know, even though it's a dogma that, you know, we can know God's existence without recourse to faith, it's also a dogma that that's not good enough. We also need faith, you know, so we have to have faith in God, even though we can know God without faith. So it's an interesting little conundrum there, that we can know him, but we also have to have faith in him. That's an interesting thing. So when I came to God, I was a generic monotheist, and my listeners are going to get sick of me repeating myself all the time, but I'm just letting you know, I was a generic monotheist, and I hated Christianity, and I hated in particular the Catholic Church, and I thought I must be some kind of Muslim because I can't be a Jew. I mean, obviously I'm not Jewish, whatever. And I just didn't feel worthy to be a Jew, one of the chosen people. Yeah, I'm going to be one of the chosen people. I was like, no. So I thought of some kind of Muslim, because I had to worship this God that I discovered. So I felt the impulse to worship publicly, which is strange because I've always thought of myself as very much not a public worship kind of guy, a ritual, all that stuff. It never appealed to me. But as soon as I discovered that God is God, I was like, I have to worship him in public. So I thought I must be some sort of Muslim, and I started looking into Muslim apologetics. I never believed in Muhammad or the Quran, but I kind of liked the generic monotheism that was filtering through all these Muslims. And just by chance, I ended up being Christian, becoming a Christian. And for me, I'd read enough history to know that Christianity is Catholicism. So I became Catholic. So I have the faith-based beliefs, and because I've accepted Catholicism, I've got the dogmas. I've got the living magisterium. I've got all the rule book. You know, I could look it up in a book. Yep. You know, what do I believe? Oh, is this what I believe? Okay. Why do I believe that? Oh, because of this and this and that. Okay, that sounds reasonable. Whatever. And I'm constantly challenging my faith. Like, I mean, well, this seems weird. Like, how could that be? You know, like I've gone through a few moments recently where a couple of the dogmas didn't seem to really jive too well together. There are these two dogmas, and that's a deal breaker for me. Like, I'm out of Christianity if I can find two dogmas that contradict each other, right? That's the beauty of being a Catholic. It's like I got deal breakers, right? So you know, a lot of my Protestant friends get all upset. No, David, no, don't let your faith in Jesus be ruined by, you know, if the Catholic Church is not the one true church or whatever. It's like, well, no, sorry. If the Catholic Church is done, then I'm done with Christ, period. You know, that's sort of the impact because I take my religion seriously, and the claims of the Catholic faith are very bold claims of the Catholic faith. So all of this to say that my epistemology is grounded in God, first and foremost, but secondarily, the Catholic faith, and there's a lot of meat on those bones, right? And there's also a lot of wiggle room, because things are complicated in the Catholic Church. So I can sort of hide out in the obscurity of the complexity of the historical situation of the dogmas and all these sorts of things, and just sort of roll with the punches and not get caught up in all the anti-Pope Francis right-wing conspiracy theories, like all the Catholics who hate Pope Francis. They want to suck me into believing that he's a false pope and all these sorts of things. And because of the complexity of the Catholic faith and the Catholic history and the dogmas and everything else and the councils, I'm able to just take a deep breath and say, well, there's no need to panic. I've read the history. I know it's always been complicated. It's always been messy. And I can just relax, and I don't need to like panic and say, oh, it's like the biggest crisis in the church ever, and I'm going to leave the church. And I see a lot of people doing that, but I'm not prone to that. Huh?
Those people clearly know nothing of Philip the Fair.
Tell me the story.
Philip the Fair?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so Philip the Fair is a French monarch. To build this up a little, if I had a time machine and could go and like assassinate one figure in history, it would be Philip the Fair. And I am convinced that would fix most of the issues with Western civilization. So Philip the Fair had issues with the fact that the Catholic Church wanted to tell him what to do, right? Like he's not just allowed to do whatever he wants. He has issues with this. He is the one, so he, in response to this, decides to, he and the Pope butt heads frequently. And it gets so bad at one point that he decides to kidnap the Pope. Poor guy's a little bit older. He fails to actually, successfully kidnap him, but the Pope is a little bit older, and that stress is just too much on him, and he dies. At which point Philip the Fair goes, aha! So I run France. France is kind of the big power in Europe right now, so I choose the Pope. And by the way, the papacy's in Avignon now, in France, where I can keep an eye on it. And while we're at it, I need some more money because of this whole war thing. So those Templars over there, they've got money. They were caught doing awful, awful things. Here's the list. No, I didn't make this up. What? What do you mean they denied it until we tortured them? I don't know what you're talking about. Your Pope's on board, right? Right. So he is the, it is his fault that the papacy stopped being a major religious position and became a political tool, right? Like the Avignon papacy corrupts the papacy. After that, everybody knows, the French bishops choose the Pope, and the Pope listens to the French king, period. End of story. And it lasts for a while. When there is an attempt to fix it, what happens is the other bishops come together and they're like, we're choosing a proper Pope here. And they put a Pope in Italy, and the French bishops go, nah, this guy's the Pope. And then you have two popes, and then third guy pops up on the scene, not important, right? And so what eventually happens is they have to call a ecumenical council. No, neither of you are Pope. Both of you are stepping down. This guy is Pope now. But the problem is that by that point, there had been about 100 years of this Avignon papacy. So the papacy was just seen as a political tool and as a general life of luxury sort of thing. So that's why you get into the line of popes that comes after that are less interested in religion and more interested in the Renaissance art and architecture, right? Which leads us to the Pope that decides to build St. Peter's. Sure, yeah, this whole selling indulgences thing isn't actually even allowed, but I'm not going to stop it because I'm getting money from it. And then when this one little monk comes up and is like, hey, this isn't okay, this whole indulgences thing, I'll just make sure he dies, quietly sweep him under the rug, and move on with my life, right? That was the intention. Except this one little monk has a German prince friend who kidnaps him, keeps him safe, and lets him publish with this whole new printing press thing, and thus we have the Protestant Reformation, right? The church wouldn't have needed the reform. It needed reforming. That's why the Counter-Reformation happens, is because it did need reform. but it only needed reform going back because of Philip the Fair. And then to justify my earlier claim, right, it is the Protestant Reformation that kicks off the holy wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, the Protestants, the Protestants, the Protestants, the other Protestants, and the Anabaptists, and the whole government, right? Like, all of that chaos comes from this. The witch hunts come from this because we really didn't have strong witch hunts before that. The collapse of centralized government in Germany comes from this, which allows for a massive surge in anti-Semitism that comes from this. All of the, like, essentially all of the chaos that happens in Europe comes from this. And that chaos leads to things like massive, deep roots of anti-Semitism in Germany that don't go away when we finally get Otto von Bismarck bringing them together in their centralized government, which then leads to World War II, right? Like, direct line, if we didn't have Philip the Fair, the whole of history would have been different because the papacy wouldn't have been able to be taken out of power as a fundamental balance on the powers in Europe. That entirely wiped that away, took the teeth from the church, and eventually leads to its own downfall. So that's Philip the Fair. Hate the guy.
Amazing summary. Wow, that was amazing. Yeah, amazing. I'd like to sit on your classes. You teach history sometimes?
Yes, yeah. Actually, next semester I'll be doing a Roman history. So it should be a lot of fun. Oh, I'm so excited.
I've never been able to read history, even Catholic history. I struggle with it. And because it's like to me, it's like a soap opera. There are many characters and there's intrigue, and it's like my whole life I've been trying to not pay attention to that in my real life. Like, it's like, because there was a lot of politics and infighting in my family. So I just was like, avoid. So last thing I want to do is pick up a history book and just see more of that. You know what I
mean? Sure. So
you seem comfortable with that. You grasp it and you're able to have a timeline and a vision and that sort of thing. That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm always interested in, ironically, I'm always interested in causes of things, right? Like, how did we get where we are? And can we fix it? But then I've also just always, I have a bachelor's degree in history and I have a bachelor's degree in English literature. I like stories. Turns out I don't think I've ever read, that's exaggerating. I've read very few fictional works that are as compelling as something like the Bona Dea scandal in Rome, right? Where a botched attempt at a guy cross-dressing to crash a girl's sleepover ends with the Senate house burning down and is causes Caesar to divorce his wife and is the reason he gets stabbed outside of a theater rather than in the Senate house, right? Fiction has a hard time kind of matching stuff like that, right? At some point, fiction authors go, no, we have to make this sound like it could actually happen. And then you read history and they don't care. They're doing their thing. And sometimes you read it, you're just like, this is utterly absurd. But here's the list of evidence to support all of this. So I guess it happened, sure.
Yeah. Well, as you were recounting the whole Avignon papacy debacle, I was thinking how biblical it sounds. Again, it's like the Old Testament. It's like, what a mess. What a mess. The whole of salvation history from the fall of man, from my perspective, from the fall up until today, it's just a great, epic, biblical mess of biblical proportions. Because of that intrigue, because of the selfishness, because of the shifting alliances, because of the blood and the money and the sex and the greed and everything else. It's like, when does it ever stop? And how can we have these quiet little pockets of holy men and women who have given themselves to God? Even as an atheist, you must admire, whether you believe or not, you must admire these quiet little pockets of solitude where there are hospitals, schools, people taking care of each other, taking care of the most vulnerable. That must touch your heart.
Oh, absolutely. I admire them even today, and I'm sad that it's not Western civilization, right? Because there's some European countries that still do this really, really well, right? I was looking at the Netherlands recently because it's somewhere I might want to go study law. like, oh my goodness, they are like, everything in their society revolves around making sure that like people are okay, right? Like they get refugees and they give them a stipend so that they can decorate their house so that their house can feel like a home, right? Like
That's
that sort
good.
of thing, where their whole society revolves around this idea of like, let's make sure that people are okay,
Yeah.
right? Like a corporation can't just fire someone, right? You can only get fired from your job if it's, if they have a redundancy plan. And then with that redundancy plan, they still have to submit it to a board, uh, saying, hey, this person is redundant. We want to let them go. And part of that is you have to provide proof that you, as a business, did your absolute best to find the other person a job. And if they're not satisfied that you tried to make sure they were going to be okay, they won't let you let them go. Like the whole society revolves around just making sure that everyone's okay and that people are being taken care of. And then I look over here and I'm like, oh wow, like I'm in Texas, right? We're at what is it, at will work state, something like that, right? Where um and it's the way that it's pitched is you can leave your job at any time, but the flip side is you can be fired for anything at any time. And so that doesn't leave you with this great sense of I'm empowered. No. It leaves you with this absolute fear that, oh my goodness, like I can get fired from my job because they just don't like the car I drive. Like there's, as long as it's not a protected class,
Mm.
I ain't fired for anything.
Yeah.
I have no job security here. And that, yeah, but yeah, I'm even still incredibly inspired by the examples of those pockets in which human dignity is the utmost concern, right? That human life and well-being is the focus, and I'm incredibly grateful that those still exist, and sad I don't live in one.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I, we traveled in Europe, and we lived in Belgium and England and different places. And when we lived in Belgium, we were close enough to the Netherlands, we could bike there. So we biked to the Netherlands. And it was a bit further to get to Amsterdam, but Amsterdam was a city that I wanted to live in. It was like one of my favorite cities in the whole world that I've ever seen. And I've always been, I may be very socially conservative, and I am socially conservative, but I'm attracted to very liberal cities. That's my
Yeah.
niche. Like I want to live in a liberal city. That's what I want. I'm attracted to that, and I like immigration. So, I'm not a typical, right-wing political conservative kind of guy. I just think that people should respect sex and intimacy in the family, and not be masturbating and stuff like that. So, but you can do what you want. You do what you want. I'm just telling you what my opinion is. You can do what you want, but I'm a live and let live social conservative, right? Like, so I think
Yeah.
it's just healthier. I think it's an Epicurean approach to happiness. Don't masturbate. Don't watch pornography. Don't hire hookers. Don't sleep around. Find a nice spouse and have some kids. Like that's my social conservatism. But I'm live and let live. Like you do what you want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
But when it comes to places where I'd like to live, I don't want to live in some right wing place with a bunch of right wing people. No way.
Yeah.
No way. No way. Especially like the loud political types. It's like that's the worst for me. It's like the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, I'm sure you've experienced this, you've traveled, right? Like traveling changes your perspective on things. Like I find I don't mind the idea of taxes. Now I hate taxes in America because they don't do anything, right? Like my taxes right now aren't really helping the roads, aren't making sure we have Social Security or Medicare, aren't helping with our healthcare system, aren't helping with our schools. Like my taxes are just going to like the pockets of the rich. I don't mind the idea of taxes when they're going to things that are helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So like I would be a conservative here in
Fiscally.
taxes specifically, right? Because like I don't want my money going to the pockets of the politicians who then don't do anything with it other than, buy nicer
Cocaine.
houses and pay off, like I don't want my money going there. But if there were a like actual viable series of programs, like if I lived in the Netherlands, 100%, absolutely, I have no problem with the fact that they have a high tax rate, because what I get out of it is like there's no homelessness. They just provide houses, they provide healthcare, they provide quality of life things for people, that all these things that I 100% like absolutely totally behind somewhere that can do it. So it's kind of similar to my like, it might sound hypocritical, right? I'm firmly for strict gun laws here in the States, and I also believe that, like, in general, most people in states that have like open carry should own a gun. And that's because the laws being the way that they are, not owning a gun isn't going to make a difference on the political sphere, but it is going to make a difference if the people who can go and just buy them without a background check or anything can come and get you with them, right? Like, I want a society in which we don't have to feel like we need to protect ourselves, because there are things in place for that. Since I don't live in that, you need to feel safe and protect yourself.
Yeah. Well, you bring to mind one of the most central and most important issues, which is education. If we had a proper education, and my vision of education might be slightly different because I'm a monotheist, but if we had a proper education, and education begins in the home. So we need a good home, we need good families, we need a good education system for outside of the home, also at schools. Then we're not going to have criminals walking around raping and killing people, right? Like, I mean, if everyone belongs to a nice family and everyone's happy and more or less, and with their own struggles, because little Billy wants his sister's piece of pie or whatever, like, that's just inevitable. There's going to be selfishness and tension because of that. But I mean, that's what parenting is about, I guess. Just instilling in the child this idea that you can't get what you want. You just can't. It's not yours, and just like, you can't have it. You can't have all the things that you want. If we can start young, getting these people, then they're not going to be out joining gangs and raping and killing people and extortion and joining mafias. And then it could be, now I'm painting this little fantasy, this utopia, but I know from my Christian perspective, Jesus said that the weeds are going to be among the wheat till the end, and they're going to be wolves in sheep's clothing. And even the priests, I don't even trust priests, much less, some gangster on the street. Maybe I trust the gangster more than the priest, because at least he's open about what his intentions are, And I just went and saw a nice priest this morning, had a session with him, and I do trust him, but in the back of my mind, he belongs to a conservative religious order, and one of their guys in the States in the same order just got nailed with child pornography, allegedly. So it's like, it's a conservative, religious order, and one of their guys is up for child pornography. Now, is it true or not true? I don't know, but I mean, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but he pled guilty, so what does that mean? And it's just like, and if it's not him, it's someone else is going to be doing it. Like, I'm sure we could find a bunch of priests who are sick perverts. So it's like, it's always there, tainting my experience as a Christian, that even the Christians in the sick, fallen world are corruptible, and many of them have allowed themselves to be corrupted. Now, there's a difference between, like, I'm corrupt, I'm a corruptible human being, but I'm, at least on paper, I'm striving to fight against that corruption. I'm trying to say no to sin and yes to grace more and more each day. I'm not doing a very good job, but in principle, like, if you ask me, would I rather be on Satan's team or Jesus' team, I'll say Jesus, right? So, like, I mean, I'm taking a stand, and I like to think that the priests who do fall into sin, they repent and they regret it, and they're fighting against their lower animal appetites, like I am. But there are others who are just pretending to be good and holy, and they're just like, they want to dive into the greed and the pleasure and the sin. And you talked about the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages. It's like, There's some good examples of that, right?
Oh goodness, yeah. Well, especially in the early modern period, right? Coming out of the Middle Ages, especially.
With the Borgias, or what are they called?
Not even just that. They're so a lot of people confuse the Middle Ages and the early modern period.
Okay. Which centuries are we talking about here? 15, 16?
Yeah, the 1516s are going to be more early modern. Early Middle Ages are going to be 9 to 11.
Okay.
Right, you get kind of into the High Middle Ages in, I believe, the 12th century, although it's the dates in general are my strong suit. ADHD is not a fan of memorizing dates.
Oh, you have ADHD?
Oh, very strongly. I don't know if you've noticed, but I generally, in any of these, am like just rocking a little bit in my chair at all times.
Okay.
But yeah, the early Middle Ages actually seem to be pretty, and this is much to the credit of the Catholic Church. Like, as an atheist, I will say, number one, if I were to become Christian again, it would be Catholic, like, hard stop. But number two, like, much to the credit of the Catholic Church, early Middle Ages did overthrow a lot of the problems with the Roman patriarchy, right? Like, we have evidence of women running churches. We have women traveling. We have, like, the status of women was elevated. Slavery was done away with. And although serfdom isn't a whole lot better, it's better. It is still better than slavery. And with that, you have a whole, like, the Dark Ages are called the Dark Ages because you don't get a lot of the grand kind of big educational advancements and writing advancements and things like that. Instead, what you're getting is windmills becoming so prevalent that they have to, like, make laws at how far apart they can be, because without, like, we don't have slaves anymore, we still need to do labor. So a lot of, like, agricultural advancements, right? And what you really have is with the Renaissance, with kind of the rediscovery of Roman ideals, you get kind of a resurgence of that, like, the patriarchal ideas, and that's when you start to get into a lot more of the corruption. You definitely have it in the Middle Ages, right? Like, it's there. But there does seem to be less of it than when we get the Renaissance, which brings kind of a elevated power of the, I mean, it also helps that, like, early Middle Ages, after the Roman Empire fractures, most of Europe is small fractured kingdoms, right? Like, Spain is 4, 5, 6 different principalities. Makes it a lot harder to consolidate that power anywhere, and consolidation of power is what ends up leading to a lot of that corruption in politics. But also, if you're bishop in a tiny little country, it's not that impressive. Once that tiny country consolidates, becomes a massive country, now you've got a lot more influence. So a lot of that comes the late Middle Ages, early modern.
Yeah, well, the principle of subsidiarity in the Catholic Church can be applied in politics and in other settings, like even in business. But it's an excellent policy. It's so simple, but it's just that the power should reside at the lowest possible level, the lowest level that is reasonable, obviously. Like, I mean, I'm not going to be calling the shots for national defense or whatever. I'm just a little guy at the bottom of the pyramid here in Canada. Like, I'm not going to start telling people where to build the next highway or whatever. Like, that's up to people a little bit higher up the food chain than me. But when it comes to me deciding what I want to have injected into my body, I think that should be between myself and my doctor of choice, and I can get a second opinion if I don't agree. I wouldn't want the Prime Minister telling me that I can't work unless I get a certain injection, right? But right. That's what we had. So the principle of subsidiarity was not being respected there, not being implemented there.
Well, what gets so frustrating to me, like, like, first you had mentioned, like, the education system, and oh my goodness, first of all, I live in Texas, right? We have one of the lower education systems in the States. It's getting worse, and there are some very, very clear and obvious things we could do to fix it. The governor ignored all of them and passed a bill that instead does the opposite, right? Like, there's a reason I am a private teacher for a homeschool family instead of a, like, public teacher at this point. But that aside, yeah, I think the thing I got most frustrated with when it came to all of that with COVID, and then especially like right after COVID, and a lot of the narratives is that we have the technology that 90% of your job can be done without you even having to go into an office. The idea that they were forcing people to, because I agree, I didn't like the idea of any sort of vaccine mandates, right? Like I've been vaccinated at this point, but I waited a good year and a half, 2 years, because I wanted to make sure that, there's so many conflicting opinions from people who are credentialed. I want to see what happens if this plays out. Are there going to be, like, is the narrative going to shift one way or the other? I didn't want to just be an experiment. And most people are in positions, or were in positions, where they could do that. But there was this big push to, instead of seeing this as an opportunity to like change how we thought about things like work and productivity, how we thought about things like forcing just all of the standard work culture, right? The 9 to 5 in an office surrounded by people. Like, we have the technology that's not necessary. And you still had a lot of businesses that just ignored the fact that they could make their employees' lives better, and went for it. Like that to me is where my frustrations come in, is how much of our lives are entirely dictated by corporations we have no control over, politicians who don't have to feel the effects of the things they pass and the things they say, because it's a very different environment when you are a multimillionaire who doesn't have to go to work, who's passing laws for everybody else that's forcing them into situations they're not comfortable with one way or another.
Why do people who are, I have a very humble lifestyle, I'm poor by choice, and because I'm a loser, but also by choice. But why do people that have a lot of money, why do they work so hard? Because I've noticed that people with a lot of money, they work really hard. Did they get money because they work hard? Or
No.
are they working hard because they're chasing after power? Like, I mean, I often look at corrupt politicians, and I know for a fact that they're putting in more hours than I would if I had the amount of money that they have. Like, I would just say, hey, I've got enough, see you later. I'm going to go quietly live my life with my family and just be contented. But when I see powerful people, whether they're running corporations or running countries or whatever, they work hard. Like, they put in a lot of man hours. And they could be, if they're atheists, for example, they could just be hedonists and just get a lot of pleasure doing a lot of illicit stuff, right? Like, why don't they do that? Why are they drawn to public service or whatever it is if they have all this money and they don't even believe in God anyway? Like, what's happening there? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complex. I think part of it to start, like, I don't think that hard work is enough to just get you money, right? Like, how many people, like, I don't know about Canada, but like in Texas especially, I know a lot of people who work multiple jobs
just to get by,
who are
just to get
always working and who are barely getting by, right? Like, we have seen in Texas a rise of cost of living, especially housing. Housing's gone up an insane amount. Wages have not.
Yeah.
Right. Like, as a teacher, I was putting in 60, 70, 80-hour work weeks, right? Because I'm working as a teacher 50, 60 hours a week and living paycheck to paycheck. So if I wanted to be able to have any sort of financial security, I would get off of my teaching and then go and start Ubering or Uber Eats or whatever I need to do to make more money, because I'm not making enough. So it's not just that they are working harder. That's a big American myth, but that, I think that's part of why, like, that myth is, I think, part of why we see them work so much, is there's this myth that the American dream, right? You just work hard enough and you'll be happy, right? You work hard enough, you'll get what you need, you'll get your money, and you'll be happy. And especially when we see that, like, most, like, to get their wealth, they had to either have been born into a position where they could, right? Like, we look at someone like Elon Musk. Yeah, his parents had emerald mines. That's where he started his wealth, right? He was funded. He didn't have to worry about, say, day to day. Like I couldn't start a business right now. I have to just make my ends meet, you know? I don't have time to put that on hold, start a business and hope it's successful. So, but there's this myth that working will make you happy, because money does in some way buy happiness, right? Like there's a point to which if you don't have enough money, to eat, you're not gonna be happy. If you don't have enough money to live, real hard to be happy as you're starving to death on the street, right? And then there's a point, like there's a margin where you have enough money, you're happy, you're satisfied. And increasingly we're seeing, especially in America, that it's taking more money to get to the point where that like you're comfortable and you can relax. And the way things are changing, it's very easy. Like there's a lot of stress about the fact that, I mean, we almost collapsed our economy a few days, like a couple of weeks ago, our economy, the American economy was almost just gone, because the Republicans were holding it hostage to get some budget cuts that they wanted on social programs. The politicians literally held our economy hostage and threatened to destroy it so that they could get their way, right? Like no two ways about it. So that means even once you get to kind of that level of comfort, you don't know how long that's going to last, and that keeps you going. And then also to get to that level of comfort, it tends to require, especially that higher level, it tends to require that you kind of have to push some people down to get there, right? Like, how do you get the promotion? You kind of have to push some people down. The higher you get, the more that's true. And so the people at the top with the money, first of all, like there's a point where you cross a line and you no longer are happy and satisfied, right? Where you're like, there's a point where you're making more money and less happy. And part of that is this like eternal stress and fear, especially here in America, that if you stop working, somebody will knock you out of your place if you're not continuously climbing. And then if you use any sort of illicit means to get up there, right, then you also have the constant stress and fear that you have to keep going or you could get found out for that, right? And then when you get to the really tippy top where now you've got like, you know, Elon Musk level money, well, now you're also having to make sure that you're constantly engaged in political lobbying and making sure that, say, the public opinion that the rich should be taxed more because, you know, they don't need that much money, doesn't get through. You have to constantly, like, there's a lot of stress. If you're in House of Representatives in America, you have to constantly be stressed about the fact that at some point they could pass a law that bans insider trading and you suddenly lose your ability to make an easy million. And so that creates this like dog eat dog. Like our culture is just not designed to allow us to be happy. That is antithetical to the hyper capitalistic, late stage capitalistic culture in America. If we're happy, we start questioning why we need to go to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5, right? We start questioning why we should have to stay late because you just want me to. If we're happy, we start working part-time or quitting our jobs. And that decreases the overall production, and corporations don't want that, right? Like if we're happy, we can demand higher wages because I'm not so desperate to live that I'll take whatever you hand me.
Yeah.
Right? Like our society here in America, and I don't know how it is up there, I imagine it's probably similar.
Same, yeah.
Yeah, like our society necessarily has to be built around the idea that happiness is kept from us because that's the thing that keeps the system running the way that it's running.
It's the hamster wheel. Wheel for sure. You know, as you were speaking, I was thinking about a lot of things, but one of the things that came to mind was the Grateful Dead. Do you like the Grateful Dead?
Sorry,
like Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead. You don't know them? The jam band from the...
No, I don't.
70s or 80s, whatever it was. Jerry Garcia. Anyway, it's hippie music, you know, rock, whatever. They do long sets to large crowds of hippies. But in any case, I was never a huge fan, but I watched a documentary about them because I started getting into their music. And the lead guy, Jerry Garcia, he met a woman. You know, he'd been sleeping with all kinds of women all his career long, but he was a very talented musician. And he built this band and huge sound systems and huge crowds, cult following, like a religious cult following of people that love this music. Okay, surprised you haven't heard of them. You could look them up. The Grateful Dead. Okay, so anyway, he meets this woman and he's getting older, and you know he's addicted to heroin and all kinds of drugs and stuff like that, and you know he's starting to think like maybe he discovered diving in the ocean. He's like, wow, this is like a universe here I never knew about, and it's quiet and it's peaceful, and I'm like among the fishes and the coral. It's beautiful. I'm with my wife. We're in a beautiful tropical place doing this. It's like, I'm going to get into this. This is going to be my hobby. And at a certain point, his wife or whatever, lover, whatever she was, she said to him, like, you know, I can see that you're happy when you're here and you're doing this, but when you always go back to work and it's very stressful, and why don't you just, you got all the money you need. Like, why don't you just do what you want to do and chill? Like, you know, you're getting older. And I was very touched because he was an atheist. He was raised Catholic, but he was an atheist. And his answer was very touching. He said, well, no, I can't. Because I've got dozens, if not hundreds of people depending on me for the tours, all the people that do the transportation, all the people that do this and that, and all the people that work for me. I can't let them down. I was very touched by that because, you know, he struck me as a very selfish guy with his lifestyle. But he cared, you know, he cared about this burden of responsibility that he took with him, and I admired him for that. But it sort of answers my question, doesn't it? Like, it's like you said, there's this sort of web of responsibilities and fears, and this is a more noble sort of reason to keep working. But I don't have that particular problem. Like, I got my wife that I have to feed her and keep her happy, but that's about it. I don't have any kids or anything. And I certainly don't have a staff. You know what I mean? But a lot of these people, like Elon Musk, he probably has a staff. He probably has people that he's got to worry about. Like, I mean, I got a couple of house plants, but that's about the limit of my responsibility. But, you know, it does touch me. It gives me a little bit of sympathy for these quote unquote rich and successful people that they're carrying a big burden, right? We don't often think about that. Right?
Yep. Yeah, and what's funny to me, right, is that, like, we look at countries, I mean, going back to the Netherlands, right? We look at countries like the Netherlands, like, they're not, the rich in the Netherlands aren't going to have to be nearly as stressed about that because there are social security, like, there is a social net in place.
Right.
So even if you're rich, you don't have, like, you can still be happy. You don't have to worry about that because you, like, worst case scenario, if a redundancy plan does have to go into place and you do have to worry about, you know, firing an employee, well, you also have to help them find another job, right? Like, there's systems in place to allow you to not stress about those things. Like, that's one of the, again, that goes back to the system, is even once you get the money that you're told that you need to have, once you have it, you're still stuck in the rat race. Except now you become part of it. And even if you are somebody who absolutely despises the current state of things, right, to get to that point, you then have to become part of the problem. Because now you have your staff. And let's say that you are somebody who you pay your staff well, right, which a lot of the rich don't, right? I've heard a couple of employers talk about how, yeah, you know, whether or not our employees can, you know, are getting a living wage for working full time here is their problem, not ours. Like, I've heard that from a couple of people that, yeah, our 40-hour-a-week employees aren't getting enough money to live. That's their problem. But assuming that you are somebody, right, you pay your employees well, and you're really trying to improve their quality of life, yeah, it's now incredibly important for you to continue existing so that their quality of life doesn't decrease if you don't, and you're fighting market forces, and you're fighting all these things. And so, yeah, and your employees maybe get to be happy, but you don't. And even then, the employees are always going to be stressed about the idea that their job might just stop existing, right? How many times has that happened where there's just suddenly the market shifts and there's mass layoffs? And when you have things like the threat of homelessness, when you have, just rising college costs, rising housing costs, it's America especially, and Canada by extension, our society is just designed to keep us unhappy.
What'd you think of Saint Francis of Assisi and his movement? And then when he passed away, there was infighting about the radical poverty, the spiritual Franciscans versus the others. And the church came down and said, no, we're going to say no to the radical poverty of the church. And we need to have private property, and we need to, live in the world and have money and these sorts of things. That's one question. The second question is about the life of Jesus. Whether or not you believe doesn't really matter. If you look at just the story, the Sunday school story of Jesus, doesn't matter if it's true or not, but the Sunday school story of Jesus, what impression do you get about poverty, work, paying taxes, and like render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's? What impression do you get from all that? So maybe start with St. Francis and then go back to Jesus.
Yeah, I actually really love St. Francis. First of all, Assisi is my single favorite place that I've ever been in the whole of the world, and I've traveled a lot. The gardens of St. Francis have phenomenal honey. The town is, I've spent 3 weeks just in Assisi. Love it. But St. Francis himself, right? Like, I don't know. I kind of like, what is St. Francis throwing off? Is he actually throwing off wealth? Because the story goes, right, that he's not just, like, initially especially, he's not just throwing off wealth. He's throwing off the control that is giving his father over him. Right? So we see again that idea of what he's casting off isn't necessarily material goods. It's the fact that these material goods are coming with strings. Right? The society's not allowing him. It's very similar. It is not allowing him to be happy, so he can't be happy because these things are forcing him into situations that aren't conducive for him. By throwing them off, he gets to live a life that is free of that influence. He gets to kind of do what he wants. I can almost guarantee you St. Francis would have preferred to have been able to not, say, enter into a period of, uncertainty with where his food is coming from and where he's going to be staying and all of that. If it would have been possible to have had that and also not have the influences that he would have had to have had with it, right? But I definitely, like, man, I respect the fact that he looked at the system and he was like, my dad is controlling me, my brothers are controlling me because I'm part of this, right? It's the whole, I'm living under his roof, and he's decided that means he gets to control me. Had a very similar instance with my own father. It's what ended up leading me to move out of my dad's house. Was very similar kind of, he's telling me I'm using his resources, he gets to control me, and I'm done with that, so I cast it off. Definitely for that. Love that idea. It makes me think too, in some ways, of Acts chapter 2. Acts 2, we see the church, the early church, looking around and going, oh, we need to take care of each other, right? The rich sell things to make sure that they can give money to the poor. They are all working together with the idea of, we as a group need to take care of our individuals first and foremost. 100% on board with that, right? If society could structure itself around taking care of individuals first and foremost, I think it would be a better place. And then Jesus himself, right? Like, I don't know, Jesus is kind of weird because I see him as a apocalyptic type preacher, and so sometimes he says some things that long term seem like they wouldn't be all that feasible. Or like he's not all that interested, for instance, in or able to like change the political situation of Rome. So, you know, pay unto Caesar what's Caesar's, render up to God what's God's. But even then, Jesus is very strong on taking care of the poor, taking care of the widows, right? The widow's mite story, I think is a great example of this, right? If you read it in context, it seems really, really clear that that Jesus is critiquing the idea that the Pharisees have put on her this idea that she has to give half of her wealth, right? She has to give one of her 2 coins. And she has to give, like she's poor, and rather than her being taken care of by the wealthy Pharisees, she's having to pay them. And Jesus critiques that. Like, I'm all for that. 100%. Like, Jesus does not seem very happy about the rich existing in a city with so much poverty and sickness. Like, that seems a very big issue for him, and I'm all for that. Like, I really don't understand how the Republican movement in America conflated itself with like Christianity in America, because the Republican ideas of individualism and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and how dare you take money from the rich to make sure that everybody has basic living, that's so contradictory to the ideas that Jesus seems to put forth. And yet it is, you know, the idea of Christians not voting Republican is, especially in Texas, is unheard of. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, it's one of those false dichotomies that we see everywhere, especially in the way politics is set up, like these two-party political systems, and
oh yeah,
it's just a joke. And we've all seen how a third candidate can come in and disrupt the scene, and then everyone just shifts until that third person is irrelevant, because we can just cover that territory. And you know, it is sad how we, I was just watching a documentary about World War II in Greece, and how during wartime it's not pleasant. Resources are taken over. Like, the Nazis came in and took over the resources of the towns that they conquered in Greece. And my wife's Greek, that's why we're watching it. But you know, there's a healthy rebellion, a manly rebellion against the invading country, and you know, they had some successes and some losses, and successes and losses, as you would expect. But you know, the thing that was going through my mind as I was watching this is, you know, just the power struggle, and a utopian view of healthy, wholesome family life in this Greek village where everyone, you know, despite the problems, the little petty problems, they're getting along, and they're taking care of business, and they're doing their farming and their crafts, and everyone's, you know, sort of self-sufficient. And then in come the Nazis and just disrupt everything, take all the resources, and kill the men, rape the women, whatever. And you just have to wonder, like, why? Like, you know, why are you doing this? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, do you not, like, how hungry are you? Like, are you hungry? If you're hungry, I'll give you some food. Like, if you're thirsty, I'll give you some water. Like, what are, you know, you're craving intimacy, like, hey, I'll hook you up with a chick, whatever. Like, I mean, whatever it is, like, we can work this out. Why are you steamrolling in here? It's not even your country. What's going on? Or am I just too small-minded to understand there's a bigger game going on, and these big power blocks, they need to clash in order to have a more lasting peace? Like, is that, you're a historian, you should be able to tell me, am I too provincial in my thinking to just think that, why can't people just get along, and, like, you know, don't invade a country and don't rape the women and kill the men? Like, is that just naive and provincial of me? You have a more historical perspective. Like, what's your take on that?
I'm curious, are you into Star Wars at all?
Not particularly. Although I do have a shirt my brother-in-law gave me, and I wore it once on a on a podcast, and someone's like, "Oh, look at this guy. He's not based. He's wearing this libtard T-shirt." I was like, "It's just a shirt my brother gave me." But no, I'm not too into it. I did watch the original 3 movies back when I was a kid, and I did enjoy them. But when I watched the more recent ones, I saw Jar Jar Binks and all this crap, and I was just like, ugh, lost my taste for it.
No, there was a show they released recently that actually I think addressed this very topic really, really well.
What's
right?
it called?
It's called Andor.
Andor.
And one of the things that we see that it shows really well is kind of this like, what is it like to be just an everyman in a system that has decided, in a system that is fascist, right? Like that is essentially what the Empire is in the original movies, and right, like what is it like to be that everyman, and how when you have a system that is so corrupt and hurtful and harmful, right, and you're just an everyman in it, right? Like Germany couldn't have invaded unless it had soldiers, and those soldiers are just everyday people, right? So like how do those two ideas work together? And I think there's a tricky interplay. I don't think they're like, Germany specifically is a tricky one, right? Because there's there's economic issues. There were political issues where they were scapegoated for World War I, and you have all of these things that go into the population was really oppressed and lashed out, rallied behind a guy who promised to fix things, right? That demagogue populist leader, by scapegoating and othering other groups. And it's a lot easier to attack your fellow man when you don't see him as a fellow man, right? Like number one, that's the number one. How do you attack? How do you invade? You have to convince the populace that they're doing good, and they can only be doing good if either the people they're attacking are evil and non-human, or if the people if the country they're invading is being held by people who are evil and non-human, and thus you're liberating them, right? Either the people you're fighting aren't human or they're brainwashed. As far as like why, I mean, that so many factors can go into that, but it just comes down to people want power more than they care about individual people. People in power want more power.
But remember when I talked about little Jimmy wanted his sister's piece of pie? He already had his piece. Now he wants his sister's piece. Like, I mean, am I wrong? Like, am I wrong in my drawing that parallel? It's like, is there something different on the large scale where there's this epic battle and, oh, David, you don't understand, like there's good and evil, and like there are good guys and bad guys. Do you think there are good guys and bad guys? I mean, I don't know if the fact that you're no longer religious takes away your credibility when you start talking about good versus evil, but
Christians like to tell me that it does, and then I like to try and point out that, like, if your morality is based off of the Bible, then you have to justify why slavery is immoral to you. And if you're saying that, if you're saying slavery is immoral, you can no longer say that your morality is just based off of the Bible. Now you're saying that there's something more there, and if there's something more there to you, it can be there for me too. But no, it doesn't get more complicated than that, right? Like sometimes there are good guys and bad guys. Very, very rarely. That's why we get so fascinated in World War II, because there are good guys and bad guys. There are no good guys and bad guys in World War I. Right? The only reason Germany attacked first was because Germany was convinced that the people around them were going to attack first. Right? And Germany knew that, hey, I'm not going to have the allies to defend myself. The only hope I have is making a quick attack, knocking one of them out, and then I can defend myself, right? We have to take France out in order to defend against Russia. And if I just sit here and do nothing and they attack, then we're just gone. We will not win. So there's no good guys and bad guys in most wars. Right? Like there's, especially depending on complicated, right? But yeah, it generally just comes down to that same drive, right? Why does Jimmy want Sally's pie?
Tastes good.
Like he had pie. it's not that he needs more pie. It's not that he's lacking pie. Why does he need Sally's pie? Right? And ultimately it comes down to, generally, it usually comes down to some sense of either Jimmy is wanting to like feel important, right? He wants to feel powerful, right? His ability to take Sally's pie makes him feel strong and powerful, makes him feel good about himself. Or maybe Jimmy is bought into this false idea as, poor little child, that, hey, we had the last 2 slices of pie. So now if I don't take her pie, then I don't get any pie in the future, right? So I got to take it so that I can have
Scarcity,
pie.
yeah, the scarcity mentality.
Yeah, right. So generally, no, it really doesn't get more complicated than that. You just expand that onto a world stage. People are very simple.
If you were I don't know what the age limits are, but if you were young enough to be conscripted or whatever, would you be able to do a conscientious objection? Is that an option? And would you take that option if it were an option?
I'm fortunate in that I've already been medically discharged from basic, so the chances of me getting conscripted are incredibly low.
Yeah, but just in hypothetical.
Sure. Yeah, and if they wouldn't allow me a conscientious objector, I would leave the country.
Okay.
Like I would be a draft dodger, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fundamentally opposed to the idea of being forced to engage in a system that I'm not on board with.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm jaded and I don't trust the government. You know what I mean? That's 100%. That's my basic position.
Yeah. Maybe if I trusted the government more, right? But yeah, no, I agree. I'm jaded. I don't trust the government. I've seen what they've done with their conscriptions, right? Vietnam was ridiculous. Shouldn't have happened. Korea shouldn't have happened.
Iraq,
Afghanistan. And those are just the actual wars, right? Like, oh my goodness, have you ever looked into how many times America has decided to, like, the height of irony was American politics like throwing a massive fit at the idea that maybe Russia colluded a little with our election, while simultaneously we have like demonstrably colluded in more elections and more free governments than anyone else in the modern world.
Oh yeah. And don't get me started on all the drug money and the drug pushing of the CIA and all that. If it's true, I don't know if what I've read is true. It's disgusting. Governments getting involved in, running guns and human trafficking. I don't know if it's true, but it's disgusting. It's disgusting if it is.
You touch closely into that area of like, all right, if somebody is a government agent, like what separates them from the government? Right. Like at what point do we stop saying it's a government agent who's gone rogue? And at what point do we say that the government is doing a thing? And that line gets real blurry when you have people with top security clearance running drug mongering and sex trafficking down here in Texas or in California, right? It's real shady.
Oof. It's heavy stuff.
What's the word? Interviewed. There we go. I was interviewed for my top security clearances, which because I was going into the Navy as a cryptologist in the linguistics field, right? So there are 2 positions in the Navy that have, on an aircraft carrier that have top security clearance, and it's the nukes and it's the cryptologists, and they're not allowed in each other's rooms. And one of the things they talked about was that, the security clearances are getting a lot stricter because of all of the people who use the fact that they can just log onto a computer, see the complete movements of the military, the police, and just run rings out of San Diego.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. So like I said, if we had better education from childhood, there'd be less of that corruption, I think.
Better. Yeah, I think the 2 things we really need, we need better education, because that stops a lot of false information and manipulation, and stops a lot of the tactics used to take advantage of people. And then better safeguards, better addressing of causes of poverty, right? Because that's the other big class of crime that you get, is just desperation. People who are desperate are going to act out. People who are constantly stressed and in fear are going to act out, right? Like, if we can address both of those, easy, fix much of society.
I got one last question before we wrap it up here.
Yeah.
You know, there's a video game. There are many video games where you're kind of like a god in the game, and you can control. You can build cities, and you can have resources, and like you can control pretty much everything in the economy and everything. And a lot of the fun of these games is just screwing stuff up and watching the chaos. Okay. And you can watch on YouTube, there are videos of people that are really good at messing things up and making chaos. And it's just silly, over the top. And, you know, I wonder about sick, evil people who do not care, having a lot of money and power. I'm wondering why there's not more. Like, I was just thinking today, like, if I were an evil politician running things, I mean, I don't know how things work, but there's probably checks and balances. But, you know, if I were a group of powerful people that had control over things, you know, if I were evil, it might be fun just to hike the prices of food up and starve people, like in the Western first world. Like, it just might be a fun thing to do. And why aren't they doing it? Or are they doing it? Or are there constraints? And so when it comes to the evil genius just messing around with the middle classes and the lower classes, why isn't there more of it? What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. A few thoughts on that. First, my pessimism leads me to question, like, can we have more? I mean, we passed legislation to force the price of insulin to something like $35, and immediately there's backlash and they try and get rid of it so that we can go back to corporations getting to decide prices, which, by the way, means that people are dying because something that costs $10 to produce is costing $100+ to buy. People die because, corporations. Right. So, like, I struggle to see how more of that could be done. But I think, like, ultimately what it comes down to is, I just saw a graph recently that was really interesting. That was some school did an intensive research into legislation passed in America over a period of time. And they compared it to the support from the people. Right. And the idea is that in general, you should see ideas that have no support from people shouldn't get passed. Ideas that have complete support from people should get passed. Right. And the graph should look kind of like this. It doesn't. It looks like this. It's about 30%. Like,
so it's irrelevant what the support is?
Yeah, it's irrelevant what the people. But the funny thing is, if you filter those people so that you're only looking at the top, like, 2%, suddenly it looks like that again.
Oh, yeah?
Yep. Because it doesn't matter what the people want, it matters. So, yeah, I mean, you have people who want to just, you know, mess around and find out, right? You've got those people who have those, like, yay, let's just, like, mess up people's lives for fun.
Put the cat in the microwave and see what happens.
Yeah, and oftentimes they can get away with it, right? How long did it take for us to figure out Jeffrey Epstein was running a whole, like, sex thing on his island, and we still never did anything about any of the people who visited, right? Like, that was never really investigated or looked into more, just kind of ended. Right, so we do see some of that. But in general, number one, the people who have power and the money are just really more interested in keeping the power and the money. There's that constant fear, that constant struggle. And that keeps kind of that keeps a cap on that, because if you act out too much, somebody who wants your power and money will come in and make sure to take you out, right? Because then they get the power and money. If Donald Trump is able to be dethroned by DeSantis, now DeSantis has the complete control of the Republican Party. That works really well for him. And at some point, there is also always the concern that there's the chance that there's an uprising.
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you about. Yeah, we always outnumber the top of the pyramid, right?
Yeah, yep. Of course, how do you keep that from happening? Just you give your military a large enough budget. Like, doesn't matter if every citizen in America is armed with full, AK-47s. If the government uses drones, you just lose. Sorry.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I like I said, I think the main thing is like those people tend to be selfish. They're interested in themselves. Few of them are interested in causing harm to other people, and those people tend to do so and get away with it for long periods of time. But at the end of the day, most of the people at the top are more interested in just keeping their own power and position. They like to feel good about themselves. I think humans innately try and make themselves the good guys. And those checks keep there from being more corruption, although
so it's basically peer pressure.
Imagine.
It's just peer pressure that's keeping keeping us safe from the tyrants. It's just peer pressure. Like, people want to be seen as good, even though they might have inclinations to be even more selfish, but they want to keep their mom happy, their wife happy, and
yep.
A dirty look from the wife could save thousands of lives.
Yeah, and that's why the more insulated the people with power become, the worse the conditions for the people without it become, because it's no longer peer pressure from your community, right? Like, that's
right.
Supposed to be why we have a House of Representatives. You have peer pressure from your community.
Yeah.
The more insulated that circle becomes, the less they care about the people, because there is no peer
They're not their peers. They're not their peers.
Right.
That's what I wanted to. I always bring this up when I talk about politics. I want to get your take on it very quickly. It used to be, theoretically, maybe you can tell me in the history books if this was ever the case, but my utopian vision of politics was this little neighborhood sends their best guy to the town meeting, and this town picks their best guy to go to the regional meeting, and their best guy, they send their best guy. And it's always an imposition on this guy who already has a life, and he's not seeking power. He's the best guy for the job, and it's just a natural, organic thing. And then everyone's looking out for the best interest of their big group and their subgroup and their subgroup and their family and their, so it's like a built-in thing where politics is basically just like, we can't all go to the meeting, so let's just send John because he's really smart and he's responsible, he's a good guy, he's got good character, he's a good family, he's a good husband, he's a good father, and so on and so forth. But that's not the way it is today. So was there ever a time where this romantic, idealistic vision that I have of what representative democracy is supposed to be, was there ever a time or a place where that was kind of played out?
Absolutely not. Super simple demonstration of this, right? Let's take early American founding. So who are the slaves choosing for that representative? Oh, and suddenly you have hundreds of thousands of people who are completely denied that representative entirely, right? Like, we had that ideal, and it's a good ideal. The problem is it's never really existed, right? Because America's maybe came the closest, but all the way at the beginning, just the fact that we had slaves who had no representation means we had an entire people class who had absolutely no say in how they were treated or what was done to them. So it's great that, the town sends their best guy, except, if their best guy is one of the slaves, he's not going, right? If their best guy is opposed to slavery, he's also probably not going. We're not going to send that guy, right? So suddenly the best guy is the guy most expedient to keeping the system the way that benefits them, right? So it's a good ideal. It's just, I don't think it was ever true in America. I think we wanted it to be true. And I think at this point, it's so far from true that it's
a joke.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
People are actively and shamelessly seeking power. Seeking power. Self-serving power. So It's a sad note. It's a sad note to end on. So maybe just leave us with something a little bit cheerier, whatever is
Yeah.
on your mind, something positive, and then we'll wrap it up.
The whole world's not like this, right? I talked about the Netherlands a few times. I talked to some people from the Netherlands, and one of the things they mentioned when I started talking about some of our issues is, well, why don't y'all just have a referendum where all of the people vote, and if the majority of the people want something, it becomes law, whether the politicians push for it or not. Right? So I think the positive is, even though we're struggling to figure some of these things out on this side of the ocean, there are countries that have figured this out that are functional and great places to be. That means that, number one, that there's a large chunk of the population that is living that life, that is happy. Number two, that we have the blueprints, right? We kind of know how to be able to adapt that. And that number three, we can emulate them, right? They didn't used to be that way. And if they were able to change, we can change. It's going to take time. It's going to take work, but we see the path forward. We have the pieces. And once we can figure out how to get on that trajectory, we can be there too.
Are you going to start learning Dutch?
It's
an ugly sounding language. I would, of course, be attracted to live in one of the countries without any sort of romance language base. It's going to be hard to learn.
Latin knowledge is just useless now.
Yeah.
Germanic.
It's a weird one. Dutch is a weird one, that's for sure.
Yep. But sacrifice for the greater good.
If you can learn to speak English with a Dutch accent, that's cool. That would be cool. That's a cool accent, especially the Afrikaans accent. I love that.
Yeah. No, the European languages though, I wanted to learn Gaelic before I wanted to learn Dutch, and that's
way down on the list. You can learn Basque and move to the Basque country.
Yeah. Fortunately, Netherlands, most of them know and speak in English. The law schools are in English. It's not like Norway where they'll look at you funny if you don't start with Norwegian. Nah, you can get away with knowing just English for a while.
Oh yeah. Very exciting. So when is that going to happen? Possibly, if it's going to happen, it'll happen within the next year or two?
My hope would be next September.
Okay.
We'll see. I've had some financial setbacks. Car wreck happened a week ago today, actually. And that's kind of, it was a hit and run. And so I'm waiting for the detective to let me know if they identify the car based off of the plate number. And otherwise, I'm my whole income's thrown all out of whack, and it's a mess. So hopefully next year, but we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Wow, I'm sorry to hear that, but hopefully you'll get through it and they'll figure something good out. But it was a pleasure talking with you as always. We'll have to do part 3, and we'll do less politics, more philosophy and the other stuff that you're interested in. But I do really appreciate your mind and the way you think, and especially the fact that you can bring a historical perspective that's always eluded me. That's always fun. So there's a lot to dig into, and come back anytime. You know how to book it, right? So just book it.
Yeah.
Book it anytime. And if they're specific topics, you can just email me and say, hey, you want to chat about this or that? But I'm open to anything. I didn't think we would focus so much on politics, but it does bother me. It does bother me, and I'm glad to, we share a lot of opinions, it seems like. So it's nice talking with a friendly person about it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't come into this with any specific topics in mind, and I'm glad I didn't, because we covered a lot of interesting stuff.
I wanted to ask you about Catholic just war theory, but we'll save that for next time, I guess. If you've looked into that at all.
Yeah, that's tantalizing. I'm down for that conversation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Perfect.
So we'll have to wrap it up because I gotta go. I'm starting a brand new jigsaw puzzle with my wife here, so. Nice.
Once again, give your wife my thanks for lending you to me.
Yeah, not a problem. And we'll talk very soon. I'll email you, and I'll email you some links, like I said, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll book something again soon. Okay.
Perfect. All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Take good care, my brother.
All right, you too.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye.